Well, Dylan, I want to talk to you about and ask your opinion and views on an issue that people don't like to talk about, the word disruption. Now, disruption in the tourist industry is not uncommon. The industry is fickle. It can be dependent on a whole range of factors, including weather,
Yep.
road slips, COVID 19, SARS, you know, fear of military coups, um, all sorts of political actions, uh, demonstrations in your town or area. The list goes on. So I'd like to get your views, and I know you cover this in your book, but how you deal with these disruptions. And you know, it's more likely than not that you're going to have disruptions in your career as a hotel, motel manager or owner, and nothing is sure. So, you know, how do you deal with these disruptions to your normal life where all of a sudden nobody can get to your property or no one wants to go to your property or, you know, there's no way that they can travel.
Definitely, yeah.
Talk to me about that. How does that work?
Surely, I think one of the key factors we need to understand here is that in our business of tourism accommodation, unlike you're doing a little food store in a little trailer, you can't take it to if there's a disruption, you can't take the trailer to somewhere else.
You
You
can't.
you gotta wait for people to come.
Yeah.
So the understanding what all of us who are tourism providers need to understand that we're in a highly fragile industry. We can break any time like grass
Yeah.
because we have so many factors that could move against us, and they are inevitable. They'll happen mostly without your control. It will be an environment giving you that stimuli that hey, unfortunately nobody can access your hotel.
It's an act of God in some cases.
Act of God. Airport shut.
Earthquakes, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And I think all hotel operators just need to have that in the back of their mind, and it's the game of the business. I would say it's
Sure.
the game of the business. And so if you ask me, hey, how do you manage disruptions? I think there's a few formulas to it, but I see one very important formula is about how you manage your business geared for disruptions is one important thing. Do you agree with me on
Yes,
that?
I do. I absolutely. So you've got to have a plan
You've got to have a plan.
for disruption.
That's definitely the thing. So a plan in a tourism accommodation business is about managing your business in a way that you are able to survive when these disruptions occur. It's not a matter of whether it's going to happen. It's a matter of when it's
And
going
your
to happen.
income is cut.
Your income is cut, and we can have multiple ways for that to happen. So I think one key lesson which we'll discuss in this podcast number 3 is about understanding and managing your fixed and variable cost principles are a very important risk management plan to deal with disruptions. Because what you need to understand here is that if your fixed costs are high and your variable costs are low, or even if your fixed costs are high and your variable costs are high, the chances of cutting back on fixed costs is very rare. Let me give you some examples.
And difficult.
And difficult. And difficult. So, what are examples of fixed costs? I would say the number of staff you have on your permanent payroll would be a fixed cost, right? I mean, you can restructure staff, but then your loans, the interest you pay on loans, would be a fixed cost. If you have a car lease, that will be a fixed cost. If you have a cash flow loan, that will be a fixed cost. Rates, insurance, fixed costs. They'll keep going. So in a tourism accommodation business, to face disruptions, my suggestion to you is to have your fixed costs as low as possible and your variable costs as high as possible. In a tourism accommodation business, having that capital reserve is a really important framework for you to survive disruptions, because disruptions are inevitable.
Yeah.
But we can't get too excited with properties. This is what we've got to understand. When there's money, you'd want to buy new mattresses, buy new TVs, buy this, buy that, renovate that, paint that, but you have to do it in a manner where you still protect your reserves. I think that's one key lesson. And going back to what we were discussing first about fixed costs, try and keep your fixed cost as low as possible in a tourism accommodation business. Why? Because we are a very high fragile industry.
Yeah.
So sometimes having variable costs high might cost you a bit more. So for example, marketing companies might come and tell you that, hey, if you take this package for 2 years, this is your fixed cost per month. Now, if you were if you were selling marketing products, you would try and lock me into a 2-year contract, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. I would.
Because it pays for your job.
Yeah, I know it's an income that's going to continue for that 2 years.
Exactly. So the same way, you've got to be careful, given that you are in a fragile industry and you can have these disruptions.
I mean, would an example be to hire casual staff rather than permanent employment staff for some activities?
Definitely.
Such as room cleaning and gardening and all that sort of stuff.
Definitely.
So that you're not locked into a permanent contract of employment, which if you want to get out of that, it's going to cost you a lot of money, isn't it?
Surely. The temptation would be for you to lock in permanent staff, for an example, because it's easy to train them. They're going to be with you.
Yeah.
You can have a certain amount of permanent staff, but you need to measure that. You need to measure the risk, I would say. In your pool of staff, you also need to have a good amount of casuals, because if something goes wrong, then you can quickly cut back those costs.
Sure.
Other fixed costs would be, say, marketing, big marketing promotional costs you're locking in for 2-year contracts, etc.
That's a good example. I like that.
Yeah, and even renovations. You might have the money, you might have the.
Yeah, then you might go and contract for the complete renovation rather than a bit by bit.
That's correct. So I think one key lesson you've got to learn when you have properties that are fragile is to have enough capital reserve.
Right.
I'm sure you have some of those examples yourselves.
Oh,
with your
absolutely. I
businesses.
mean, Anscrow wouldn't have survived COVID without having reserves and, dare I say, even having a freehold building, which we had to sell to survive COVID. But the company itself survived because we had to reserve the asset of the building and some reserve cash.
Definitely. So I think that's one very important lesson. Managing your fixed cost and keeping it as low as possible, and keeping your variable cost high, even though it costs you a little bit more on the short run, you can sustain your business on the long run. That's what I think.
In your budgeting for the year, would you include a reserve? In other words, an amount of money that was put aside as a reserve, not for use either in salaries or dividends or whatever else. Would you see that as being logical?
I think that should be part of the management plan, having reserves.
Part of the budget, yeah.
Part of the budget.